In this tutorial, we are going to create a validation in the system, which compares two data sources against each other. What we're trying to do in this example is to verify if the time registration data that we have in the staging area matches the data that we currently have in the data warehouse. We start by right-clicking on the test folder in the exMon administrator client and select New Validation. We give it a name, which we can always change afterwards. What we see here is an entry form for two dataset queries. Each dataset has a data provider and a name. A data provider is something that can return a dataset, like a database, which we query with SQL query, a Excel file, a PowerShell script, or an OLAP cube that is queried with a MDX. We select the staging data provider for dataset 1 and the data warehouse provider for dataset 2. We paste in the SQL and give the datasets a user-friendly name. Next, we execute both datasets to see the results in the result grid. Here we can see that we have time registration data aggregated on month and year and the sum of all working hours for both datasets. Next step is to map these two datasets together so we can reconcile them against each other. We can do this manually, column by column. We have to select the type for each column, and we have three different types we can choose from. Key columns are the columns with data that can't be aggregated, like a name, or in this case the year number. Value columns hold data that can be aggregated and reconciled between datasets and can have a variance. Info columns are columns that are informational only and are used to help the user understand more about the data being reconciled. We will not use an info column in this tutorial. If this column would be a value column, we could define the variance threshold here. By doing that, we are saying that the variance on this column can be the amount defined without the validation returning an error. The name of the year column in dataset 1 is year no. It has the same name in dataset 2. We could also have exMon automap the columns together by pushing the automap icon. We see here that exMon automatically identifies the year and month columns as value columns. We can change that and remove the threshold for both columns. Now we can try to run the validation. Like you see here, the validation has read 26 lines of data from each database into memory and reconciled them together, and everything reconciles. We can now play around a little to see what we can do to make the validation return an error. We can, for example, multiply the hours in the dataset 1 by a factor of 2 and see what happens. You see here that we are still getting 26 rows from each database, which is correct. But now we are getting all rows with a variance, which would return an error. We could also have another scenario where we, for example, only get 2 years worth of data from staging, but a couple of years of data from the data warehouse. We can reproduce that scenario by changing the SQL on dataset 1 to only show the top 10 rows in the query. Now we see that we are only getting 10 rows from dataset 1 and still 26 from dataset 2. Now we are getting key errors. Key error tells us that there exists a key combination on dataset 2 that does not exist in dataset 1. We can actually configure the validation to not return an error in the scenario, but only validate that all rows that we get in dataset 1, in this case the mirror, exists in the dataset 2 and reconcile against them. We do this by untoggling this button right here. By doing this, we are saying that it is okay that there exists a row with a key combination in dataset 2 that does not exist in dataset 1. Now let's try to run it again. We're still only getting 10 rows from dataset 1 as before, but the difference is that we now get no key errors. So the validation will not return an error in this example.